Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an epic voyage through time, the entire history of Canada, from its ancient roots shrouded in glacial mists to the vibrant, multicultural mosaic of the modern era. Imagine a land vast beyond comprehension, stretching from the frozen Arctic tundras to the lush Pacific rainforests, from the rugged Atlantic shores to the endless prairies under infinite skies. This is Canada, a nation forged not just by kings and conquerors but by the resilient spirits of its first inhabitants, the bold explorers who braved uncharted seas, the colonists who carved empires from wilderness, and the diverse peoples who built a federation of dreams amid wars, rebellions, and revolutions. Why does Canada's story matter? Because it's a tapestry of human endurance, cultural convergence, and unyielding adaptation. Here, Indigenous wisdom met European ambition, sparking conflicts and alliances that reshaped continents. From the Paleo-Indians who crossed Beringia during the last ice age to the digital pioneers of today, Canada's narrative is one of migration, innovation, and reconciliation. It's a chronicle of fur-trading forts giving way to skyscrapers, of bison herds thundering across plains now crisscrossed by highways, of quiet diplomacy that averted catastrophe and bold policies that embraced the world. As we embark on this 12-part odyssey, prepare to uncover forgotten heroes, pivotal battles, and transformative moments. We'll traverse millennia from the dawn of human settlement to the challenges of climate change and global leadership. Canada. Its history isn't just dates and events, it's the heartbeat of a people who turned a harsh frontier into a beacon of peace and prosperity. So settle in, for this is no mere recounting, it's a living saga that echoes in every maple leaf and northern light. Let us begin at the very genesis, with the ancient peoples who first called this land home. Long before the sails of European ships dotted the horizon, Canada was a thriving continent of diverse nations, cultures, and innovations. The story begins in the depths of the Pleistocene epoch, around 16,000 years ago, when the last great ice age gripped the northern hemisphere. Massive ice sheets like the Laurentide and Cordilleran blanketed much of what is now Canada, creating a formidable barrier. Yet, human ingenuity prevailed. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Bluefish Caves in Yukon and Haida Gwaii in British Columbia suggests that Paleo-Indians, our earliest ancestors on this land, migrated from Siberia across Beringia, a now submerged land bridge connecting Asia to North America. These intrepid hunters followed megafauna like mammoths and saber-toothed cats, using Clovis points, finely crafted stone spearheads, to secure their survival in an unforgiving world. As the glaciers receded around 11,000 BCE, corridors opened, allowing waves of migration southward and eastward. By 8,000 BCE, the climate had stabilized into the Holocene era, fostering regional adaptations. In the Arctic, the Paleo-Eskimo or pre-Dorset culture emerged, with people crafting harpoons from bone and ivory to hunt seals and caribou across the tundra. Further south on the Great Plains, nomadic groups like the Plano tradition pursued bison herds with atlatls, spear throwers that extended their reach and precision. These early societies weren't mere survivors, they were engineers of their environment, using controlled burns to manage grasslands and promote game populations. By the Archaic period, around 3000 BCE, cultural diversification accelerated. In the eastern woodlands, spanning from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic coast, Algonquian-speaking peoples such as the Ojibwe, Mi'kmaq, and Cree developed sophisticated seasonal cycles. They harvested wild rice in the lakes of Manitoba and Ontario, crafted birch-bark canoes for river travel, and established trade networks exchanging copper from Lake Superior for shells from the Gulf of Mexico. The maritime archaic culture in Labrador and Newfoundland built longhouses and created intricate burial mounds, reflecting spiritual beliefs in animism, where every rock, river, and animal held a sacred essence. Meanwhile, in the interior plateau of British Columbia and the prairies, Athabascan-speaking groups like the Dean honed their skills in tracking and trapping, living in teepees during summer hunts and earth lodges in winter. But perhaps the most remarkable were the northwest coast civilizations, the Haida, Tlingit, Nusha-Nulth, and Kwakwakawaku. Blessed with abundant salmon runs and towering cedar forests, they built plank houses up to 100 feet long, housing extended clans. Their society was hierarchical, with chiefs hosting potlatches, elaborate feasts where wealth was redistributed through gifts of blankets, canoes, and copper shields, reinforcing social bonds and status. Totem poles carved with mythical crests depicting ravens, eagles, and thunderbirds narrated family histories and cosmological tales, a form of visual historiography predating written records. Venturing eastward, the Iroquoian peoples of the St. Lawrence Valley and Great Lakes region revolutionized agriculture. Around 1000 CE, they adopted the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, from Mesoamerican influences via trade routes. This triad provided a balanced diet, enabling semi-permanent villages like those of the Huron-Wendat and Peitun. Women tended fields while men hunted and fished, creating matrilineal societies where clan mothers wielded significant influence in governance. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, or Iroquois League, formed around 1142 CE, according to oral traditions, united 5, later 6, nations: the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora, in a sophisticated federal system. Their great law of peace, symbolized by the Tree of Peace, emphasized consensus decision-making and influenced later democratic ideals, possibly even inspiring aspects of the U.S. Constitution. In the subarctic, boreal forests teemed with Cree and Innu hunters who traversed vast territories on snowshoes and toboggans, trading furs and tools. The Inuit, descendants of the Thule culture migrating from Alaska around 1000 CE, mastered the Arctic's extremes with igloos, kayaks, and umiaks, skin boats for whaling. Their oral epics passed through generations, chronicled heroic hunts and shamanistic rituals, blending survival with spirituality. These indigenous societies weren't isolated. They interconnected through expansive trade webs. The Hopewell interaction sphere, active from 200 BCE to 500 CE, linked Ontario's Point Peninsula complex with Ohio Valley mound builders, exchanging obsidian, flint, and ceremonial pipes. On the plains, the Blackfoot and Assiniboine nations controlled bison jumps, ingenious cliffs where herds were stampeded for mass harvests, yielding hides, meat, and tools distributed far and wide. Yet, life was not without conflict. Inter-tribal warfare, often over resources or territory, honed warrior traditions, as seen in the Beaver Wars prelude among Iroquoians. Spiritual practices unified communities, vision quests for personal guidance, sweat lodges for purification, and sun dances on the prairies for renewal. Estimates suggest a pre-contact population of 500,000 to 2 million across Canada, with dense settlements in fertile areas like the Fraser Valley. This era wasn't static, it was dynamic, marked by innovation and resilience. Indigenous knowledge of herbal medicine, astronomy, and ecology sustained them through climatic shifts like the Little Ice Age beginning around 1300 CE. Oral histories, petroglyphs at sites like Writing on Stone in Alberta, and wampum belts preserved their legacies, far richer than the primitive labels later imposed by colonizers. As we reflect on this foundation, remember, Canada's history didn't begin with European. It pulsed with the footsteps of these First Nations, whose legacies endure in place names like Toronto, from Mohawk, to Toronto, meaning where there are trees standing in the water, and in the very DNA of the land. Their stories of creation, such as the Anishinabe's Sky Woman or the Haida's raven stealing the sun, remind us that this continent was never empty. It was alive with purpose and promise. As the mists of the Atlantic parted in the year 1000 CE, a band of Norse seafarers led by the intrepid Leif Erikson set foot on the rugged shores of what they called Vinland, the land of wild grapes. This fleeting Viking outpost at Lanceau Meadows in Newfoundland marks the first documented European presence in North America, predating Columbus by 5 centuries. Drawn by tales from earlier voyages like that of Bjarni Herjolfsson, who sighted the coast in 986 CE, these Greenlandic settlers built sod longhouses, forged iron nails, and traded with local Beothuk peoples. Yet harsh winters, skirmishes, immortalized in the saga of the Greenlanders as battles with Skraelings, and supply shortages forced abandonment after a mere decade. This ephemeral encounter left no lasting colony, but it whispered of a vast, untamed continent beyond the known world, a prelude to the seismic collisions ahead. Fast forward to the late 15th century, when the age of discovery ignited under the banners of European monarchs hungry for new trade routes to Asia. In 1497, John Cabot, Giovanni Caboto, an Italian navigator sailing for England's Henry VII, charted the Newfoundland coast, claiming it as new found land for the crown. His reports of teeming cod fisheries sparked a rush of Basque, Portuguese, and English fishermen to the Grand Banks, establishing seasonal camps that evolved into the first semi-permanent European footholds. These hardy mariners bartered metal tools for furs with Mi'kmaq and Innu, unwittingly initiating a cultural exchange that would reshape indigenous economies. Beaver pelts, once utilitarian, became commodities in a transatlantic market. By the 1530s, France entered the fray with Jacques Cartier, a Breton explorer commissioned by François I to seek a northwest passage and riches akin to Spain's Aztec gold. In 1534, Cartier's first voyage penetrated the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where he encountered Stadacona near modern Quebec City, home to Iroquoian villagers. Mishearing their word Kanata, meaning village, he dubbed the region Canada, a name that stuck. His interactions were a mix of diplomacy and duplicity. He planted a cross claiming the land, kidnapped Chief Donnacona's sons to train as interpreters, and returned with tales of a mythical kingdom of Saguenay brimming with gold. Subsequent expeditions in 1535, 1536, and 1541-1543 ventured up the St. Lawrence to Hochelaga, Montreal, where he marveled at terraced cornfields and palisaded longhouses housing thousands. Yet, scurvy ravaged his crew, relieved only by indigenous knowledge of Anada, white cedar tea, and hostilities escalated, leading to failed colonization attempts like Charlesbourg Royale. These early contacts sowed seeds of transformation. Europeans introduced iron axes, knives, and firearms, accelerating indigenous hunting efficiencies but disrupting traditional balances. In return, beaver hats became Parisian fashion sensations, fueling demand that drew more adventurers. By the late 16th century, the Basque whaling stations along Labrador and the Strait of Belle Isle exemplified this proto-globalization, with indigenous groups like the Inuit adapting harpoon technologies while facing exploitation. Enter Samuel de Champlain, the father of New France, whose vision crystallized French ambitions. In 1603, he mapped the St. Lawrence with Pierre Duguay de Mons, forging alliances with the Montagnais, Innu, and Algonquin against Iroquoian foes. This strategic pact, sealed in the 1603 Tadoussac Treaty, positioned France in the fur trade's heart. Champlain's 1608 founding of Quebec City, a fortified habitude on the cliffs of Cap Diamant, marked the birth of permanent settlement. With just 28 men surviving the first brutal winter, he navigated alliances, joining a 1609 battle at Lake Champlain, where French arquebuses decimated Mohawk warriors, igniting the Beaver Wars, a century of conflict over fur territories. The fur trade burgeoned as the economic engine of New France. Coureurs de bois, unlicensed woods runners, ventured deep into the interior, living among indigenous nations, learning languages, and marrying into families in what became the Métis culture. Licensed voyageurs, hardy paddlers in birch-bark canoes, traversed rivers like the Ottawa and Mattawa, portaging loads up to 180 pounds. The Hudson's Bay Company, chartered by England's Charles II in 1670, challenged French dominance from the north, establishing forts like York Factory on Hudson Bay. This rivalry spurred exploration. Radisson and Groseilliers, defecting French traders, guided the English to lucrative northern routes, while French Jesuits like Jean de Brébeuf evangelized among the Hurons, enduring tortures chronicled in the Jesuit Relations, propaganda that romanticized martyrdom to secure royal support. Indigenous agency was pivotal. Nations like the Wendat, Huron, Confederacy became middlemen trading European goods for furs from northern tribes amassing power until smallpox epidemics, introduced unwittingly via contact, decimated populations by up to 90% in some areas between 1634 and 1640. The Iroquois, armed by Dutch traders from New Netherland, New York, launched devastating raids, dispersing the Huron in 1649 and reshaping alliances. Meanwhile, on the west coast, Spanish explorers like Juan Perez in 1774 and British captain James Cook in 1778 at Nootka Sound encountered Nuuchah-Nulth chiefs like Mackinac, trading sea otter pelts that ignited the maritime fur trade with China. By the early 18th century, French expansion pushed westward. In 1673, Louis Joliet and Jesuit Jacques Marquette descended the Mississippi from the Great Lakes, claiming vast territories, while René Robert Cavelier de la Salle reached the Gulf of Mexico in 1682, naming Louisiana after Louis XIV. In Acadia, Nova Scotia, founded in 1605 by de Monts, Acadian farmers diked marshes for agriculture, blending French and Micmac ways until British deportations loomed. These explorations weren't mere adventures, they were imperial chess moves. The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 ceded Newfoundland, Acadia, and Hudson Bay to Britain after the War of Spanish Succession, compressing New France. Yet figures like Pierre Gaultier de Varennes et de La Vérendrye pushed to the Rockies by 1743, establishing four, like La Reine, on the Saskatchewan River, linking to Plains Cree networks. Culturally, contact bred syncretism. Missionaries converted thousands, building reserves like Kahnawake near Montreal, where Mohawk Catholics blended traditions. Enslavement practices evolved. Indigenous panis were traded alongside African slaves in New France, though numbers remained small. As we close this chapter, the dawn of contact reveals a continent in flux, European dreams clashing with indigenous realities, birthing a hybrid world of opportunity and tragedy. From Ericsson's Vinland to Champlain's Quebec, these encounters set the stage for colonial empires where fur, faith, and firepower would dictate the next acts in Canada's unfolding drama. With Quebec's founding in 1608, Samuel de Champlain ignited the engine of French colonization, transforming fleeting trade posts into a burgeoning empire along the St. Lawrence. This era, spanning over a century and a half, saw New France evolve from a precarious outpost into a vibrant society of farmers, traders, missionaries, and soldiers, all woven into the fabric of indigenous alliances and rivalries. It was a time when the fleur-de-lis flew over vast territories, from the icy shores of Acadia to the humid bayous of Louisiana, fueled by royal ambitions, religious zeal, and the insatiable European appetite for beaver pelts. Yet beneath the grandeur lay tensions, demographic fragility, economic dependencies, and brewing conflicts with British rivals that would ultimately spell its downfall. Let us delve into this chapter of resilience and rivalry, where the foundations of French Canada were laid amid wilderness and warfare. Champlain's Quebec was more fortress than city, its wooden palisades defending against Iroquois raids, and the relentless winters that claimed lives through starvation and scurvy. By 1627, the population hovered at a mere 100 souls, prompting Cardinal Richelieu, Louis XIII's chief minister, to intervene. He chartered the Company of 100 Associates, granting them monopoly over the fur trade in exchange for transporting 4,000 settlers over 15 years. Though they fell short, delivering only about 300 annually, this initiative spurred growth. Seigneuries, feudal land grants, emerged along the river, where seigneurs like Robert Giffard recruited habitants, tenant farmers, from Normandy and Perche. These sturdy peasants cleared forests for wheat fields, built stone houses with steep roofs to shed snow, and formed tight-knit communities centered on parish churches. Women, often arriving as filles du roi, king's daughters sponsored by Louis XIV between 1663 and 1673, bolstered demographics, marrying quickly and bearing large families that tripled the population to 3,000 by 1666. Society in New France blended absolutism with frontier pragmatism. Governor-generals like Frontenac wielded royal authority from the Château Saint-Louis, enforcing the Coutume de Paris legal code that emphasized paternal hierarchy. Intendants such as Jean Talon, appointed in 1665, micromanaged the economy, establishing shipyards, breweries, and iron forges to diversify beyond furs. Talon's 1666 census, the first in North America, revealed a youthful, male-dominated populace, prompting incentives like bounties for large families, up to 300 livres for mothers of 12 children. The Catholic Church loomed large. Jesuits, Recollets, and Ursulines evangelized with fervor, founding schools like the Séminaire de Québec in 1663 and hospitals such as Hôtel Dieu. Figures like Marguerite Bourgeois established the Congregation of Notre-Dame, educating girls in Montreal, founded in 1642 as Ville-Marie by Paul de Chomedey de Maisonneuve to counter Iroquois threats. Montreal, initially a mission outpost, grew into a fur trade hub, its strategic island location facilitating voyages into the Pays d'en-Haut, upper country. Coureurs de bois, defying company monopolies, ventured westward, adopting indigenous ways, wearing deerskin leggings, paddling canoes laden with trade goods. Their exploits, romanticized in folklore, birthed the Métis Nation through unions with Cree and Ojibwe women, creating bilingual communities in places like Red River. The fur trade's golden age peaked in the 1680s with annual exports of 100,000 pelts funding Versailles' splendors. Yet, overhunting depleted beaver stocks pushing frontiersmen farther. Explorers like the La Vérendrye family reached Lake Winnipeg by 1738, erecting Fort Maurepas and dreaming of a western sea route to Asia. Indigenous relations defined New France's survival. The French-Huron-Algonquin alliance, forged in Champlain's era, faced catastrophe during the Beaver Wars 1640-1701. Iroquois, supplied by Dutch and later English arms, shattered the Huron Confederacy in 1649, scattering survivors to places like Lorette, near Quebec. Epidemics compounded the horror. Measles and smallpox carried on French ships ravaged nations like the Petun and Neutral, reducing indigenous populations by half in the Great Lakes region. Yet, diplomacy endured. The Great Peace of Montreal in 1701, negotiated by Governor Callière with 39 nations, including the Iroquois, ended hostilities, establishing neutrality that allowed French expansion. Missionaries played dual roles, converters and diplomats, with reserves like Sillery housing converted Algonquins, though many resisted, preserving traditions amid coercion. Southward, New France sprawled ambitiously. In 1682, La Salle claimed the Mississippi Basin as Louisiana, honoring Louis XIV, and founded posts like Fort St. Louis. By 1699, Pierre Le Moyne d'Iberville established Biloxi and Mobile, tapping into deerskin and slave trades. New Orleans, founded in 1718 by his brother Bienville, became a Creole melting pot of French, African, and Spanish influences, its vieux carré grid alive with jazz precursors and voodoo syncretism. Acadia, with its distinct identity, thrived on fishing and farming. Port Royal, Annapolis Royal, anchored a population of 2,000 by 1710, intermarrying with Micmac to form Acadian culture, famed for diked marshes yielding bountiful harvests. Imperial rivalries shadowed this prosperity. The Anglo-French Wars spilled across the Atlantic. King William's War, 1689 to 1697, saw Frontenac repel English invasions, his cannons thundering from Quebec's heights. Queen Anne's War, 1702-1713, cost France dearly. The Treaty of Utrecht stripped Acadia, Newfoundland, and Hudson Bay, confining New France to the St. Lawrence Corps. Undeterred, France fortified Louisbourg on Ile Royale, Cape Breton, in 1713, a massive stone citadel costing 30 million livres, guarding the Gulf approaches with 200 cannons. It became a commercial nexus trading cod for West Indian sugar, but its fall to New Englanders in 1745 during King George's War exposed vulnerabilities. Demographically, New France lagged. By 1750, its 55,000 inhabitants paled against Britain's 1.5 million North American colonists. Habitant life was communal yet taxing, corvée labor for roads, militia duties against raids. Social mobility existed. Fur barons like Charles Le Moyne amassed fortunes, his sons governing from Montreal to Louisiana. Women enjoyed relative autonomy, inheriting property and running businesses, as seen in the entrepreneurial filets à la cassette. Culturally, New France fostered a distinct Canadian identity, rugged, devout, and adaptive. Folk songs like À la Clairefontaine echoed in taverns, while literature emerged in travelogues like La Hontante's dialogues, critiquing European society through indigenous lenses. Artisans crafted silverwork and furniture, blending Rococo with native motifs. Yet, omens of decline mounted. The War of Austrian Succession, 1740-1748, returned Louisbourg via treaty, but tensions festered. Governor Duquesne's Ohio Valley forts in 1754 sparked clashes with Virginia militia led by young George Washington, igniting the French and Indian War, the North American theater of the 7 Years' War. British naval supremacy blockaded supplies, while General Montcalm's victories at Oswego, 1756, and Fort William Henry, 1757, couldn't stem the tide. The 1758 recapture of Louisbourg sealed New France's fate, paving the way for Wolfe's assault on Quebec. As this era wanes, New France stands as a testament to human ambition in adversity, a society that tamed rivers, forged alliances, and dreamed big, only to confront the inexorable march of empire. Its legacy endures in Quebec's language, laws, and spirit, a cornerstone of Canadian duality amid the coming British conquest. In the mid-18th century, the simmering rivalries between European powers erupted into a global conflagration known as the 7 Years' War, a conflict that would redraw the map of North America and seal the fate of New France. Often dubbed the First True World War, it pitted Britain and its allies against France and theirs, spanning continents from Europe to India, but in the New World it became the French and Indian War, a brutal struggle for continental supremacy. Here, amid dense forests, frozen rivers, and fortified heights, indigenous warriors, colonial militias, and regular troops clashed in a theater where geography dictated strategy and alliances determined destiny. This era marked the dramatic eclipse of French imperial dreams and the dawn of British dominance, setting the stage for revolutionary upheavals that would birth modern Canada. As muskets thundered and empires crumbled, the seeds of a new colonial order were sown, one fraught with promises of stability and perils of discontent. The war's North American spark ignited in the contested Ohio Valley, a fertile crossroads claimed by both empires. In 1754, French Governor Duquesne ordered forts like Presque-Isle and Le Boeuf to secure fur routes, clashing with Virginia's expansionist ambitions. Young Lieutenant Colonel George Washington, leading a ragtag force, ambushed a French detachment at Jumonville Glen, only to surrender at Fort Necessity, events that escalated into open warfare. Britain's initial campaigns faltered disastrously. General Edward Braddock's 1755 march on Fort Duquesne ended in ambush near the Monongahela River, his redcoats routed by French and Indigenous forces under Captain Beaujeu, with Shawnee and Ottawa warriors exploiting woodland tactics to inflict over 900 casualties. Indigenous nations played pivotal roles, their choices swaying battles. The Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy, long French adversaries, leaned toward Britain, though internal divisions, Mohawk siding with English, Seneca with French, complicated loyalties. In the north, Abenaki and Cherokee oscillated, while western tribes like the Odawa under Pontiac guarded Great Lakes interests. France's strategy relied on guerrilla warfare and alliances. General Montcalm, arriving in 1756, captured Fort Oswego and Fort William Henry, the latter's surrender marred by an infamous massacre, when Allied warriors, denied spoils, attacked retreating British. Events sensationalized in James Fenimore Cooper's later novel, The Last of the Mohicans. Britain's fortunes reversed under Prime Minister William Pitt the Elder, who poured resources into the colonies, raising 20,000 troops and subsidizing militias. Naval blockades strangled French supplies, while amphibious assaults targeted key strongholds. In 1758, General Geoffrey Amherst seized Louisbourg after a grueling siege, its massive walls crumbling under 13,000 shells, opening the St. Lawrence Gateway. That same year, Brigadier John Forbes reclaimed the Ohio with Fort Pitt, at Duquesne's ruins. Montcalm's Pyrrhic victory at Carillon, Ticonderoga, repelling 16,000 British with just 3,600 men, couldn't halt the momentum. The war's climax unfolded in 1759, the Annus Mirabilis for Britain. General James Wolfe, a daring 32-year-old commander, besieged Quebec, bombarding the city for months while habitants endured famine. Montcalm, defending from the Beauport shores, held firm until Wolfe's audacious nighttime ascent up the Anse-au-Foulon cliffs on September 13th. The ensuing Battle of the Plains of Abraham lasted mere minutes. Arrayed on the open field, French regulars charged British lines, only to shatter under disciplined volleys. Both generals fell mortally wounded, Wolfe expiring with victory assured. Montcalm carried off, murmuring, "We have lost all." Quebec capitulated days later, though Governor Vaudreuil held out until 1760, surrendering Montreal after Amherst's three-pronged advance converged. The 1763 Treaty of Paris formalized the conquest. France ceded Canada, Louisiana east of the Mississippi, and Cape Breton to Britain, retaining only Saint-Pierre and Miquelon for fishing rights. Spain gained western Louisiana, but Britain's triumph was total, gaining a continent-spanning domain from Hudson Bay to Florida. Yet victory bred challenges. The war's $130 million cost burdened London, prompting taxes like the 1765 Stamp Act that ignited colonial unrest, foreshadowing the American Revolution. In the newly christened province of Quebec, British rule began with military occupation under Governor Murray, who governed a shell-shocked population of 70,000 Canadians, farmers, seigneurs, and clergy reeling from defeat. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 aimed to organize the spoils, creating Quebec from the St. Lawrence Corps, reserving western lands as an Indian reserve to appease Indigenous allies via Superintendent Sir William Johnson. It forbade settlement beyond the Appalachians, AESOP to prevent costly frontier wars, but enraged American speculators. Indigenous resistance flared immediately. Pontiac's rebellion in 1763 united Ottawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and others against British forts, capturing 8, including Detroit, in coordinated assaults, protesting trade abuses and land grabs. Pontiac, a charismatic Ottawa war chief, besieged Detroit for months, employing ruses like a lacrosse game to infiltrate Michilimackinac. Though quelled by 1766 with Amherst's germ warfare, infamously distributing smallpox-infected blankets, the uprising forced policy shifts, leading to the 1768 Treaty of Fort Stanwix, where Iroquois ceded Kentucky for goods, opening floods of settlers. For Canadians, adaptation was pragmatic. Murray, sympathetic to Catholic subjects, allowed French civil law and seigneurial system to persist, defying Protestant hardliners. The influx of British merchants, the fur barons of Montreal, seized economic reins, marginalizing French traders but fostering a bilingual elite. The Catholic Church, under Bishop Briand, negotiated loyalty oaths sans Protestant conversion, preserving faith as a cultural bulwark. Acadia's tragedy deepened with the 1755 Grand Dérangement. British Governor Lawrence deported 11,000 Acadians for suspected disloyalty during the war, scattering families to Louisiana, becoming Cajuns, France, and the colonies. Many returned post-treaty, resettling in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island, their resilient culture enduring in folklore and cuisine. Westward, the Hudson's Bay Company consolidated, clashing with Montreal-based Northwest Company peddlers like Alexander Mackenzie, who in 1789 navigated his namesake river to the Arctic, seeking Pacific routes. Rupert's Land teemed with Métis buffalo hunters, their Red River carts creaking across prairies. By 1774, tensions mounted. The Quebec Act, enacted to secure Canadian loyalty amid American unrest, expanded Quebec's borders to the Ohio, restored French law, and tithes and tolerated Catholicism, outraging Protestant colonists who decried it as an intolerable act. This olive branch to French subjects alienated Americans, accelerating their march to independence. As this tumultuous period closes, the conquest emerges not as mere subjugation, but a crucible forging Canadian dualism. From the blood-soaked Plains of Abraham to Pontiac's defiant stand, these years birthed a British North America where French heritage persisted amid English governance, Indigenous sovereignty eroded under expansion, and revolutionary winds gathered from the south. It was an interlude of transition, where the echoes of fallen empires whispered warnings to the new order rising from their ashes. As the drums of revolution echoed from the 13 American colonies, British North America, comprising Quebec, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, and Rupert's Land, stood at a crossroads, its fate intertwined with the upheavals to the south. The period from 1775 to 1815 was one of profound transformation, marked by the influx of United Empire loyalists fleeing Republican fervor, the redrawing of frontiers amid invasion threats, and the crucible of the War of 1812 that solidified a nascent Canadian identity. Here, amid the clash of ideologies and arms, French and English subjects navigated loyalty to the crown, indigenous nations maneuvered for sovereignty, and settlers carved homesteads from wilderness. This era wasn't merely a sidebar to American independence. It was the forge where British North America's resilience was tempered, birthing a mosaic of cultures united against external perils and internal divisions. The American Revolution erupted in 1775 at Lexington and Concord, pitting patriots against loyalists in a fratricidal strife that spilled northward. Britain's Quebec Act of 1774 intended to placate Canadians, instead fueled colonial resentment, branding it an intolerable imposition of popery and absolutism. In response, the Continental Congress dispatched invasions to sway Quebec. General Richard Montgomery captured Montreal in November 1775, while Benedict Arnold's grueling march through Maine's wilds converged on Quebec City. Governor Guy Carleton, a steadfast defender, rallied 1,200 militia, including Canadians who, despite grievances over British merchant dominance, preferred familiar rule to uncertain rebellion. The New Year's Eve assault faltered in a blizzard. Montgomery fell to grapeshot. Arnold's forces withered under siege until British reinforcements under John Burgoyne arrived in spring 1776, routing the invaders at Trois-Rivières. This failed conquest preserved Quebec's loyalty, though only 500 Canadians enlisted, wary of American anti-Catholic rhetoric. Loyalist migrations reshaped the North. As patriots confiscated properties and tarred dissenters, some 80,000 Loyalists, Anglican clergy, merchants, farmers, and enslaved Africans promised freedom, fled to British territories. Nova Scotia absorbed 35,000, swelling Halifax and birthing Shelburne as a boomtown of 10,000 before economic woes dispersed many. Black Loyalists, like those in Birchtown, faced discrimination despite grants, leading Gafun 200 to Sierra Leone in 1792 under John Clarkson's aegis. In Quebec, 10,000 settled the eastern townships, introducing Protestantism and English law to French heartlands. The largest wave, 40,000, trekked to the Niagara and St. Lawrence frontiers, petitioning for lands as compensation for losses. Governor Frederick Haldimand allocated townships along Lake Ontario, founding communities like Kingston and York, Toronto. These UEL descendants, bearing the honorific United Empire Loyalist, instilled a conservative ethos, venerating monarchy and order against republican chaos. Constitutional reforms followed. The influx strained Quebec's French framework, prompting the Constitutional Act of 1791, which bifurcated the province into Lower Canada, Quebec, with French civil law and Catholic rights intact, and Upper Canada, Ontario, under English common law. Each gained elected assemblies, though power resided with appointed governors and councils. Oligarchies, like Lower Canada's Chateau Clique, English merchants, and Upper Canada's Family Compact, Tory elites. Nova Scotia, already with an assembly since 1758, saw its population double, leading to the 1784 partition, creating New Brunswick for Loyalist strongholds like St. John. Prince Edward Island, renamed from Ile Saint-Jean, grappled with absentee landlords, fueling tenant unrest. Indigenous dynamics shifted amid encroachment. The 1763 Proclamations Reserve dissolved under pressure. The 1784 Haldimand Tract granted Six Nations Iroquois, Mohawk allies led by Joseph Brant, Thayendanegea, lands along the Grand River, though later, sales and disputes eroded holdings. Western tribes, like the Ojibwe, ceded territories via treaties like the 1790 McKee Purchase, exchanging annuities for lands opening Upper Canada to settlement. Yet resentment simmered. Shawnee leader Tecumseh, born of revolutionary border wars, forged confederacies against American expansion, allying with Britain in looming conflicts. Economic foundations solidified. Fur trade rivalries intensified between the Hudson's Bay Company, HBC, and Montreal's Northwest Company, NWC. The latter's explorers like David Thompson mapping the Columbia River by 1811, claiming Pacific drainages. Agriculture boomed in Upper Canada, with Loyalist farms yielding wheat exported via the St. Lawrence, while Lower Canada's habitants clung to subsistence amid seigneurial dues. Maritime fisheries and shipbuilding flourished, Halifax emerging as a naval base guarding Atlantic convoys. Napoleonic wars embroiled the colonies indirectly, but the War of 1812 thrust them into the fray, triggered by British impressment of American sailors, trade restrictions, and U.S. ambitions to annex Canada, a mere matter of marching, boasted Thomas Jefferson. The conflict tested fragile defenses. In June 1812, President Madison declared war. American forces invaded at Detroit, only to surrender to General Isaac Brock and Tecumseh's warriors, who captured the fort without a shot. Brock, a guerrilla tactician, then repelled invasions at Queenston Heights, though mortally wounded, his dying cry, "Push on, York volunteers," immortalized in lore. Laura Seccord's legendary 20-mile trek through swamps warned of American advances, enabling victory at Beaver Dams. The war raged across fronts. In 1813, Americans torched York, looting its parliament, prompting British reprisals including the burning of Washington in 1814, retribution led by troops from Halifax. Naval clashes on Lake Erie saw Oliver Hazard Perry's victory, but British triumphs at Chateauguay and Chrysler's Farm, where Canadian voltigeurs under Charles de Salaberry ambushed invaders, halted St. Lawrence thrust. Indigenous contributions proved decisive. Tecumseh's death at Moraviantown in 1813 fractured his confederacy, dooming native resistance east of the Mississippi. Maritime provinces endured privateer raids but profited from blockade running. Newfoundland's fishermen armed as fencibles, while Nova Scotia's privateers like the Liverpool Packet captured 50 prizes. The war's toll, 2,000 Canadian dead, economies disrupted but unity forged. French and English, settler and indigenous, rallied under the Union Jack. The 1814 Treaty of Ghent restored status quo antebellum, no territorial gains, but profound legacies endured. Rush-Bagot Agreement of 1817 demilitarized the Great Lakes, birthing the world's longest undefended border. Indigenous losses were catastrophic. Treaties like 1815's with the Cree ceded more lands, accelerating dispossession. For Canada, the war mythologized as a people's war, nurturing anti-Americanism and proto-nationalism. Brock and Tecumseh as heroes, symbolizing sacrifice. Post-war, immigration surged. Scots and Irish swelled Upper Canada to 150,000 by 1820, straining resources but fueling growth. Canals like the 1825 Erie bypassed Montreal, spurring Laquine Canal projects. Social reforms stirred. Abolitionists pushed against slavery, outlawed in Upper Canada by 1793's Act Against Slavery, though persisting in Maritimes until 1834's empire-wide emancipation. As this chapter concludes, the era from Revolution to 1815 emerges as a bedrock of Canadian distinctiveness, Loyalist grit, bilingual governance, and martial baptism, distinguishing it from the Republican South. Borders hardened, identities coalesced, setting the stage for 19th-century expansions and agitations. In the smoke of Queenston and embers of York, a nation stirred, resilient against the tides of change sweeping the continent. In the aftermath of the War of 1812, British North America entered a transformative era, where the embers of colonial discontent ignited calls for reform, culminating in rebellions, constitutional overhauls, and the tentative steps toward nationhood. This period, stretching from the Peace of Ghent to the eve of Confederation, was a cauldron of political agitation, economic upheaval, and social evolution. Upper and Lower Canada, the Maritimes, and the Western Territories grappled with oligarchic rule, ethnic tensions, and the inexorable pull of industrialization. Indigenous peoples faced accelerating dispossession as settlers surged westward, while immigrants, Irish fleeing the potato famine, Scots displaced by clearances, swelled populations and diversified societies. It was an age of canal builders and railway dreamers, of radical reformers like William Lyon Mackenzie and Louis-Joseph Papineau, whose fiery oratory challenged the status quo. Amid economic booms and busts, these years forged the ideological bedrock for a united Canada, blending British parliamentary traditions with North American pragmatism. Let us navigate this labyrinth of rebellion and reconciliation, where the clamour for responsible government echoed across provinces, reshaping the colonial landscape into the prelude of a federation. Post-1815, prosperity beckoned amid challenges. The Rideau Canal, completed in 1832 under Colonel John By, snaked 202 kilometres from Ottawa to Kingston, its 47 locks a marvel of engineering safeguarding against American threats while facilitating trade. Immigration exploded. Between 1815 and 1850, over 800,000 arrived, predominantly Irish Catholics enduring coffin ships during the 1847 typhus epidemic, which claimed 5,000 in Montreal's fever sheds. Upper Canada's population quadrupled to 952,000 by 1851, its wheat fields feeding Britain's corn law markets until repeal in 1846 triggered recessions. Lower Canada, with 890,000 souls, clung to seigneurial agriculture, but English merchants dominated commerce, exacerbating French-English divides. Governance bred resentment. The Constitutional Act's assemblies were toothless against appointed executive councils. Upper Canada's family, compact a Tory Anglican clique led by Bishop John Strachan, controlled patronage and lands, while Lower Canada's Château clique, English-dominated under governors like Lord Dalhousie, vetoed French-majority bills. Grievances mounted, corrupt land grants favouring speculators, clergy reserves alienating non-Anglicans, and taxes funding canals benefiting elites. Reformers emerged. In Upper Canada, Robert Gourlay's 1818 township meetings decried abuses, leading to his banishment, while Mackenzie's newspaper, The Colonial Advocate, lambasted the compact as a petty, corrupt, insolent Tory clique. In Lower Canada, tensions were ethnic and cultural. The Parti Canadien, evolving into the Patriots under Papineau, Speaker of the Assembly since 1815, demanded control over revenues and an elected legislative council. The 1832 cholera epidemic, killing 9,000, exposed urban squalor, while the Assembly's 1834-92 resolutions catalogued grievances from linguistic discrimination to seigneurial burdens. Britain's response, Lord John Russell's 10 resolutions in 1837 rejected reforms empowering governors to bypass assemblies, a spark to the powder keg. The rebellions of 1837-1838 erupted as twin insurrections. In Lower Canada, patriot rallies at Saint-Denis and Saint-Charles mobilized habitants against the clique. On November 23, 1837, Colonel Gore's troops clashed with rebels at Saint-Denis, where Dr. Wilfred Nelson's forces triumphed temporarily, chanting Vive la Liberté. But defeats at Saint-Charles and Saint-Eustache followed. At the latter, the church burned with 70 rebels inside. Papineau fleeing to the U.S. martial law ensued, with 12 executions, including Chevalier de Lorimier, whose scaffold speech decried tyranny, and hundreds exiled to Australia. Upper Canada's uprising was swifter, more farcical. Mackenzie, inspired by lower events, rallied 800 at Montgomery's Tavern north of Toronto on December 5, 1837. Ill-equipped farmers marched down Yonge Street, only to scatter under militia fire led by Sheriff Jarvis. Mackenzie escaped disguised as a woman, later exiled. Border raids persisted, the Patriot War, with American sympathizers like the Hunters' Lodges invading from Navy Island, burning the steamer Sir Robert Peel in 1838, prompting British reprisals. The Maritimes simmered without exploding. Nova Scotia's Joseph Howe, through his Nova Scotian editorials, championed responsible government, ministers accountable to elected assemblies. New Brunswick's timber barons clashed over Crown lands, while Prince Edward Island's Esquite movement sought to reclaim absentee estates. Britain's response was investigative and reformist. Lord Durham, radical Whig appointed High Commissioner in 1838, arrived amid controversy, his lavish entourage dubbed the Durham Boat. His 1839 report on the affairs of British North America diagnosed ailments, ethnic strife in Lower Canada as two nations warring in the bosom of a single state, recommending union to assimilate French Canadians. He advocated responsible government, where executives derive power from assembly majorities, not imperial fiat. Though Durham resigned amid backlash, his ordinance banishing rebels without trial violated habeas corpus, the report's ideas endured. The Act of Union in 1840 merged Upper and Lower into the province of Canada, with equal representation despite Lower's larger population, a deliberate check on French influence. Debts were pooled, favouring indebted Upper Canada, and English became official, measures fueling resentment. Yet Governor-General Lord Sydenham manoeuvred reforms. By 1841, assemblies convened in Kingston, with reformers like Robert Baldwin and Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine forging an alliance transcending ethnicity. Responsible government materialized gradually. In 1842, Baldwin Lafontaine's ministry resigned over patronage disputes, setting precedents. Nova Scotia achieved it first in 1848 under James Boyle Uniacke, following Howe's campaigns. By 1848, Lord Elgin, Durham's son-in-law, conceded in Canada, signing the Rebellion Losses Bill compensating 1837 victims, including rebels, despite Montreal Tory riots that burned Parliament. Elgin's restraint entrenched the principle: governors as figureheads, ministries commanding assembly confidence. Economic shifts accelerated change. The 1849 repeal of Navigation Acts opened free trade, while reciprocity with the US in 1854 boosted exports. Railways revolutionized. The Grand Trunk, chartered in 1852, linked Montreal to Toronto by 1856. Its scandals, like bribes to politicians, exposing corruption but knitting economies. Montreal burgeoned as a commercial hub, its Victoria Bridge, 1859, the world's longest, symbolizing progress. Indigenous experiences darkened. The 1850 Robinson Treaties ceded Lake Superior shores for annuities, while the 1857 Gradual Civilization Act aimed assimilation, offering enfranchisement for civilized individuals, renouncing status for citizenship, a policy rejected by most. In Rupert's Land, Métis at Red River, led by Louis Riel's father, resisted HBC monopoly via the 1849 Sayre trial, affirming free trade. Social reforms stirred. Egerton Ryerson's 1846 School Act in Canada West promoted public education, while temperance societies battled alcohol amid urban vice. Women's roles evolved. Figures like Laura Secord were lionized, but rights lagged. Married women gained property controls only in 1859. By the 1860s, union faltered under sectionalism. Equal representation disadvantaged growing Canada West, leading to political deadlocks, 12 governments between 1854 and 1864. The American Civil War heightened fears. Confederate raids like St. Albans in 1864 and Fenian incursions from Irish-American veterans underscored vulnerability. Economic woes post-reciprocity expiry in 1866, coupled with Britain's push for colonial self-reliance, propelled unity talks. The Charlottetown Conference of 1864, initially maritime-focused, expanded when Canadian delegates like John A. Macdonald, George Etienne Cartier, and George Brown gatecrashed, proposing federation. Quebec Conference refined 72 resolutions, a federal union with strong central government, provincial powers over local matters, and representation by population in the Commons, sectional equality in the Senate. As this epoch wanes, the path to responsible government reveals a maturation from colonial dependency to self-rule. Rebellions bloodshed yielded reforms, alliances bridged divides, and economic imperatives birthed Confederate visions. From Papineau's exile to Elgin's concessions, these decades sculpted a Canada poised for sovereignty, not through revolution, but evolution, a testament to negotiation in the shadow of empire. With the ink barely dry on the Quebec resolutions, the architects of Confederation, visionaries like John A. Macdonald, George Etienne Cartier, and George Brown, gathered in London in 1866, refining their blueprint amid the fog-shrouded Thames. The British North America Act, proclaimed on July 1, 1867, birthed the Dominion of Canada, uniting the province of Canada, split into Ontario and Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, into a federal union under Queen Victoria. This wasn't mere administrative reshuffling, it was a bold gamble to counter American manifest destiny, harness economic potentials, and bridge linguistic divides in a vast, sparsely peopled land. Celebrations erupted, fireworks in Toronto, parades in Halifax, but beneath the jubilation lay fragilities, anti-Confederation sentiments in the Maritimes, Indigenous exclusions, and the daunting task of expanding westward. This era, from Dominion Day to the death of MacDonald, was a whirlwind of nation-building, railways snaking across prairies, provinces joining the fold, and rebellions testing the Federation's mettle. It was a time when Canada stretched its sinews from Atlantic to Pacific, forging identity through compromise, conflict, and unyielding ambition. Let us chronicle this foundational chapter where a loose coalition evolved into a transcontinental power, its story etched in iron rails, treaty ink, and the blood of resistors. The BNA Act's framework balanced central authority with provincial autonomy. Ottawa controlled defence, trade, currency, and criminal law, while provinces managed education, health, and local works, safeguards for Quebec's cultural survival, insisted upon by Cartier, the Blue leader who championed French rights. MacDonald, Canada's first Prime Minister, a wily Scottish lawyer with a penchant for whiskey and wit, led the Conservative coalition, navigating the 72-seat House of Commons and appointed Senate. Representation by population favoured populous Ontario, while the Senate's regional equality protected smaller provinces. Yet omissions glared. Women, Indigenous peoples, and Asians were disenfranchised, citizenship undefined beyond British subjecthood. Economic imperatives drove expansion. The U.S. purchase of Alaska in 1867 and Fenian raids, Irish nationalists invading from America, like the 1866 Battle of Ridgeway, underscored vulnerability. MacDonald eyed Rupert's Land, the HBC's vast domain from Hudson Bay to the Rockies. In 1869, Britain transferred it for $300,000 and land concessions, renaming it the Northwest Territories. But haste bred resistance. At Red River, Métis, French-English descendants of fur traders, feared cultural erasure under Anglo-Ontarian influx. Enter Louis Riel, the charismatic Métis leader educated in Montreal, who in 1869 seized Fort Garry, establishing a provisional government. His list of rights demanded bilingualism, land protections, and provincial status, echoing fears of bison decline and settler encroachment. Delegates like Gabriel Dumont negotiated in Ottawa, but tensions escalated when MacDonald dispatched surveyors prematurely. Riel's execution of Thomas Scott, an Orangeman agitator, in 1870 inflamed Ontario Protestants, branding Riel a murderer. The Wolseley expedition, 200 troops trekking via lakes and portages, restored order without bloodshed, but Riel fled to exile. Manitoba entered Confederation in 1870 as a postage stamp province, its 1.4 million acres guaranteeing Métis titles, though bureaucratic delays and speculators eroded them. Westward momentum accelerated. British Columbia, a gold rush colony since 1858 under Governor James Douglas, teetered on bankruptcy post-Caribou boom. In 1871, it joined Confederation enticed by MacDonald, his promise of a transcontinental railway within a decade, a Herculean pledge linking Victoria to Montreal across 3,000 miles of wilderness. Prince Edward Island followed in 1873, lured by debt relief and ferry links, completing the Eastern Arc. Newfoundland, wary of debt and fisheries control, demurred until 1949. The Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR, became the era's epic. Chartered in 1881 after MacDonald's national policy, tariffs protecting infant industries, immigration promotion, and Western settlement, the project fell to a syndicate led by George Stephen and Donald Smith. Engineer Sandford Fleming surveyed routes, but scandals plagued. The 1873 Pacific scandal exposed bribes from railway promoters, toppling MacDonald's government. Liberal Alexander Mackenzie, Prime Minister from 1873-1878, slowed progress amid depression, favouring gradualism over extravagance. MacDonald's 1878 return turbocharged efforts. Chinese labourers, 15,000 imported under exploitative contracts, endured dynamite blasts and avalanches in the Fraser Canyon, paid half-white wages amid racism. In the prairies, William Van Horn's crews laid 500 miles in 1883 alone, a record pace. Indigenous nations like the Blackfoot under Crowfoot signed treaties for reserves and annuities, but starvation loomed as bison vanished, deliberate extermination aiding settlement. Treaty 7 in 1877 ceded southern Alberta for promises often broken, fueling grievances. The Northwest Rebellion of 1885 ignited these tinders. Métis at Batoche, led by returned Riel and Dumont, petitioned for land scrip amid crop failures and ignored claims. Cree chiefs Big Bear and Poundmaker, facing famine after Treaty 6, joined in uprisings, raiding Battleford, killing agents at Frog Lake. MacDonald mobilized 5,000 troops via the nearly completed CPR, crushing resistance at Duck Lake and Batoche. Dumont's guerrillas inflicted casualties, but rifled artillery prevailed. Riel surrendered, his trial in Regina a national spectacle, defended as sane visionary by Quebec lawyers, condemned as traitor by Ontarians. Hanged on November 16, 1885, Riel became a martyr, fracturing unity. Quebec rioted, viewing it as English oppression, while Honoré Mercier's Parti National surged. Yet the CPR triumphed. On November 7, 1885, Smith drove the last spike at Cregalachi, BC, a plain iron nail symbolizing connection. Freight rates boosted prairie wheat, populating Saskatchewan and Alberta, admitted as territories in 1886. Immigration policies targeted Europeans. Clifford Sifton, later immigration minister, recruited Ukrainians and Mennonites with sheepskin coats, settling homesteads under the 1872 Dominion Lands Act, 160 acres for $10 registration. Socially, the era modernized unevenly. Toronto and Montreal industrialized, Massey Harris farm machinery, Molson breweries. Labor stirred, the 1872 Trade Unions Act legalized organizing, but strikes like the 1886 Toronto printers' walkout met resistance. Women's suffrage advocates like Dr. Emily Stowe founded the Toronto Women's Literary Club in 1877, evolving into enfranchisement pushes. Education expanded, compulsory schooling in Ontario. By 1871, though Quebec's church-controlled system lagged. Indigenous policies darkened under the Indian Act of 1876, consolidating control. Status definitions excluded women marrying non-natives, bans on potlatches, and sun dances aimed cultural genocide. Residential schools, piloted in 1883, forcibly assimilated children, a tragic legacy of abuse. Politically, MacDonald dominated, winning elections through gerrymandering and patronage, the old chieftain quipping, "A British subject I was born, a British subject I will die." His national policy protected manufacturers, but free trade liberals under Edward Blake and Wilfrid Laurier challenged it. Quebec's Bleu Rouge divide deepened post-Riel, with ultramontane Catholics clashing secular nationalists. By 1891, MacDonald's death marked an end. His successors, Abbott, Thompson, Bowell, Tupper, stumbled through scandals and recessions. Canada, now 4.8 million strong, spanned seas, its cities electrified, telephones ringing. Yet fissures loomed, French-English rifts, Western alienation, Indigenous marginalization. As this formative chapter closes, Confederation emerges as a masterpiece of improvisation, a nation stitched from disparate colonies, propelled by rails and resolve. From Riel's gallows to the last spike's clang, these years built Canada's skeleton, resilient yet scarred, a dominion dreaming of greatness amid the challenges of unity and expansion. As the 19th century waned, Canada mourned the passing of Sir John A. Macdonald, the indomitable architect of Confederation, whose death in 1891 left a vacuum in a nation still finding its footing. The Dominion, now a quarter-century old, teetered amid economic doldrums, regional discontents, and the perennial tug-of-war between French and English identities. Yet from this interregnum rose Wilfrid Laurier, the eloquent Quebecer, whose silver tongue and visionary policies would usher in a golden age of prosperity and progress. Elected in 1896 as Canada's first French-Canadian Prime Minister, Laurier embodied compromise, declaring, "The 20th century belongs to Canada," a prophecy that seemed fulfilled in the boom years ahead. This period, from Macdonald's twilight to the eve of the Great War, was a whirlwind of immigration waves crashing upon prairie shores, factories humming in urban hearts, and diplomatic maneuvers asserting sovereignty against British imperial strings and American economic shadows. It was an era when Canada industrialized, diversified and matured, yet grappled with Indigenous injustices, labor strife, and the festering wounds of cultural division. As railroads extended their iron grip and cities swelled with newcomers, the nation edged toward autonomy, only to confront the cataclysmic pull of global conflict. Let us explore this vibrant chapter, where optimism bloomed amid the challenges of forging a modern, multicultural dominion. The 1890s opened tumultuously. Macdonald's conservative successors, John Abbott, John Thompson, Mackenzie Bowell, and Charles Tupper, stumbled through short tenures marred by scandals like the Manitoba Schools Question. This crisis erupted in 1890 when Manitoba abolished publicly funded Catholic schools, violating Confederation guarantees and igniting Quebec fury. Bowell's cabinet fractured, with ministers resigning en masse, paving the way for Tupper's brief 1896 stint. Laurier, leading the Liberals, capitalized on discontent, promising sunny ways over coercion. His victory marked a seismic shift. A French Catholic at the helm, allied with Ontario's Oliver Mowat and Nova Scotia's William Fielding, bridging divides with charisma and pragmatism. Laurier's administration ignited the Laurier boom, a surge propelled by global wheat demand, mineral discoveries, and aggressive immigration. Clifford Sifton, immigration minister from 1896 to 1905, targeted stalwart peasants in sheepskin coats, Ukrainians, Poles, Scandinavians, and Doukhobors, luring them with free homesteads under the Dominion Lands Act. Between 1896 and 1914, 3 million immigrants arrived, tripling the population to 7.2 million. Prairies transformed. Saskatchewan and Alberta joined Confederation in 1905, their boundless fields yielding bumper crops exported via the CPR, and new lines like the Canadian Northern and Grand Trunk Pacific. Winnipeg ballooned into the Chicago of the North, its grain exchange a hub of fortunes made and lost. Industrialization accelerated under the national policy's tariffs, shielding manufacturers from U.S. competition. Montreal's factories churned textiles and machinery, Toronto's distillers and banks thrived, while Hamilton's steel mills forged the sinews of modernity. Hydroelectric power from Niagara Falls, harnessed in 1895, lit cities and powered industries, symbolizing technological leap. Labor unions burgeoned. The Trades and Labor Congress, founded in 1883, advocated for workers amid strikes like the 1901 Montreal Street Railway walkout. Yet, exploitation persisted. Child labor in coal mines, unsafe conditions in lumber camps, fueling socialist stirrings, including the 1907 formation of the Socialist Party of Canada. Western expansion clashed with Indigenous realities. The numbered treaties, 1 through 11, 1871, 1921, ceded vast lands for reserves, annuities and schools, but promises faltered. Famine stalked the Plains Cree after bison extinction, leading to the 1885 rebellion's echoes. The Indian Act amendments tightened control, banning traditional ceremonies and enforcing pass systems restricting reserve movement, a de facto apartheid. Residential schools expanded under Duncan Campbell Scott's oversight, with over 4,000 institutions by 1910, ripping children from families in a genocidal bid for assimilation, their motto, "Kill the Indian in the child," inflicting intergenerational trauma. In British Columbia, Asian immigration sparked racism. Chinese laborers post-CPR completion faced head taxes escalating to $500 by 1903, while the 1907 Asiatic Exclusion League riots in Vancouver targeted Japanese and Indians. Laurier's government negotiated the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan in 1908, capping immigration, but tensions simmered, foreshadowing internment policies. Diplomatically, Laurier navigated imperial ties and American pressures. The Alaska boundary dispute of 1903, arbitrated in London, favored U.S. claims, exposing British favoritism toward America and fueling Canadian nationalism. Laurier rebuffed Imperial Federation schemes, asserting autonomy at colonial conferences. The 1899 Boer War tested loyalties. English Canada rallied, sending 7,000 volunteers, including the Strathcona Horse, while Quebec protested, viewing it as British jingoism. Henri Bourassa, founding Le Devoir in 1910, championed Canadian nationalism, decrying imperialist vampires. Maritime provinces lagged amid the boom. Nova Scotia's coal and steel, fueled by Dominion coal and Scotia steel, employed thousands, but outmigration to New England factories drained youth. Newfoundland, still independent, thrived on fisheries but rejected Confederation overtures. Prince Edward Island's farms exported seed potatoes, while New Brunswick's lumber barons, like the Irvings, built empires. Social reforms progressed haltingly. Women's suffrage gained traction. Manitoba's Nellie McClung mocked prohibition foes in 1914, mock parliaments, paving enfranchisement. Temperance movements, led by the Women's Christian Temperance Union, pushed for bans. Succeeding provincially by 1916, education universalized, with universities like McGill and Toronto pioneering research. Ernest Rutherford's atomic work at McGill earning the 1908 Nobel. Culturally, Canada flowered. Lucy Maud Montgomery's 1908 Anne of Green Gables captured maritime idyls, while painters like the Group of Seven, though formalized later, sketched northern landscapes, rejecting European styles for rugged realism. Sports united. Hockey's Stanley Cup, donated in 1893 by Governor-General Lord Stanley, became a national passion, with the Montreal Canadiens founding in 1909. Yet, cracks widened. The 1911 election toppled Laurier over free trade reciprocity with the U.S., feared as economic annexation. Conservative Robert Borden, a Halifax lawyer, won on anti-American platforms, pledging closer empire ties. His Naval Service Act of 1910 created the Royal Canadian Navy, a SOP to imperial defence amid dreadnought rivalries, but Quebec decried conscription hints. Economic strains mounted pre-war. The 1913 recession hit hard, unemployment soaring as wheat prices dipped. Labour unrest peaked in the 1912 Coal Creek strike in BC, where troops quelled riots. Western farmers formed the Grain Growers Associations, demanding tariff reductions and cooperative elevators against monopolies. Indigenous resistance persisted. In the north, Yukon First Nations navigated Klondike gold rush influxes from 1896-1899, where 100,000 stampeders disrupted caribou herds. Treaty 8, 1899 and Treaty 9, 1905, extended federal reach, but land claims festered, as in the 1910 Paulet Caveat challenging Northwest Territories treaties. As 1914 dawned, Europe teetered. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination in Sarajevo ignited the Great War, drawing Canada inexorably. Borden pledged support, Parliament approving on August 4th as Britain declared war. Enthusiasm swept English Canada, recruitment posters beckoned "Your king and country need you," while Quebec hesitated, Bourassa warning of cannon fodder. This era's close reveals a Canada transformed. From agrarian outpost to industrial contender, its population diverse, economy robust, yet society stratified. Laurier's sunny ways illuminated progress, but shadows of war, racism and inequality loomed. From prairie sod huts to urban smokestacks, these years honed national character, resilient, adaptive, and increasingly independent, a dominion stepping from colonial adolescence toward the forge of global conflict, where its mettle would be tested like never before. As the summer sun of 1914 faded into the shadows of autumn, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in distant Sarajevo unleashed a chain reaction that engulfed the world in the cataclysm known as the Great War. For Canada, still a young dominion basking in the Laurier boom, the conflict would prove a brutal rite of passage, transforming it from a colonial appendage into a nation tempered by fire, blood, and unyielding resolve. Prime Minister Robert Borden's pledge of support to Britain on August 4, 1914, mobilized a society unaccustomed to mass warfare, drawing volunteers from farms, factories, and frontiers. What began as enthusiastic enlistment parades in Toronto and Montreal evolved into a saga of heroism and horror, where Canadian troops etched their valor into the mud of Flanders fields. Yet, the war's home front fractures, conscription crises, economic strains, and cultural rifts foreshadowed the tumultuous interwar years, the dizzying highs of the Roaring Twenties, with jazz echoing in speakeasies and women claiming new freedoms, followed by the crushing lows of the Great Depression, where dust bowls swallowed prairie dreams and breadlines snaked through urban despair. This era sculpted Canada's modern soul, blending triumph with tragedy as it navigated imperial loyalties, emerging autonomy, and the harsh lessons of global interdependence. Let us march through these pivotal decades, from the trenches of Vimy to the soup kitchens of the dirty 30s, witnessing a nation's coming of age amid the clamour of change. Canada's entry into the war was swift and fervent. Borden's War Measures Act granted sweeping powers, interning 8,000 enemy aliens, mostly Ukrainians, as paranoia gripped the home front. The Canadian Expeditionary Force, CEF, initially 25,000 strong under British command, swelled to 620,000 by armistice, with 425,000 serving overseas. Sam Hughes, the bombastic militia minister, organized the chaotic Valcartier camp, equipping troops with the flawed Ross rifle that jammed in mud. The first contingent arrived in England in October 1914, training on Salisbury Plain before deploying to the Western Front. The war's grim reality struck at Ypres in April 1915, where Germans unleashed chlorine gas, the first chemical attack, on Allied lines. Canadian divisions holding the salient endured hellish bombardments, their urine-soaked handkerchiefs crude masks against the poison. Over 6,000 fell, but their stand earned praise as the birth of a nation, immortalized in John McCrae's poem In Flanders Fields, penned amid poppy-strewn graves. Vimy Ridge in April 1917 became the defining triumph. Under General Arthur Currie, the 1st Canadian Corps commander, meticulous planning, rehearsals on taped fields, creeping barrages, saw all 4 divisions seize the impregnable height in days, capturing 4,000 prisoners at a cost of 3,600 dead. Vimy symbolized unity, with French and English fighting shoulder to shoulder, its memorial later a pilgrimage site. Passchendaele's quagmire in late 1917 tested endurance. Currie's corps slogged through knee-deep mud, gaining 5 miles at 15,000 casualties, a Pyrrhic victory that hardened anti-war sentiments. The 100 Days Offensive in 1918 showcased Canadian prowess, spearheading Allied advances at Amiens, Arras, and Cambrai. They breached the Hindenburg Line, earning the moniker Shock Troops. By armistice on November 11, 1918, 66,000 Canadians lay dead, 172,000 wounded, a staggering toll for a population of 8 million, touching every community with Gold Star banners and empty chairs. Home front sacrifices were profound. Women entered munitions factories, producing shells at arsenals like Toronto's British forgings, while others farmed as farmerettes or nursed overseas with the Bluebirds. The Halifax explosion on December 6, 1917, devastated the city when the munitions ship Mont Blanc collided, killing 2,000 and leveling neighborhoods, a wartime tragedy amplifying calls for relief. Economically, war bonds and victory loans funded the effort, while inflation soared, sparking strikes like the 1918 Vancouver General Strike. Conscription fractured the nation. By 1917, voluntary enlistments dwindled. Borden's Military Service Act mandated drafts, exempting farmers and conscientious objectors initially. Quebec erupted in opposition. Only 25% of CEF were French-Canadian, resenting English-dominated command and imperial ties. Riots in Quebec City over Easter 1918 saw troops fire on crowds, killing 4. The 1917 election, under the Unionist government blending conservatives and pro-conscription liberals, deepened divides. Borden won handily in English Canada, but Quebec voted solidly, liberal under Laurier, who decried the Prussian policy. Indigenous contributions were heroic yet overlooked. Over 4,000 First Nations enlisted despite exemptions, figures like Francis Pegamagabo, an Ojibwe sniper with 378 kills, earning medals but returning to reserves stripped of rights. Status Indians lost enfranchisement upon enlisting, a bitter irony. Post-war, Canada asserted autonomy. At Versailles in 1919, Borden demanded separate signatures on the treaty, joining the League of Nations as a founding member. The 1922 Channok crisis, Britain's call for troops against Turkey, prompted Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King's refusal, signalling independent foreign policy. That a 1923 Halibut Treaty with the US, signed without British oversight, further loosened ties, culminating in the 1926 Balfour Declaration affirming Dominion equality. The Roaring Twenties brought prosperity and cultural ferment. Wartime industries transitioned to consumer goods, automobiles from Ford's Windsor plant, radios broadcasting CKAC's French programs in Montreal. The Winnipeg General Strike of 1919, involving 30,000 workers demanding union rights, ended in bloody Saturday clashes, radicalizing labor and birthing the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, CCF precursors. Women's suffrage triumphed federally in 1918, though Quebec lagged until 1940. The famous five, Emily Murphy, Nellie McClung et al., challenged Senate exclusions, winning the 1929 Persons case declaring women persons under law. Jazz age exuberance flourished. Speakeasies defied prohibition, repealed federally in 1920, provincially varying. Flappers danced the Charleston, and hockey professionalized with the NHL's 1917 founding. Literature bloomed. Frederick Philip Grove's Prairie novels, Marceau de la Roche's Jalna series, while the Group of Seven's bold landscapes, like Tom Thompson's Drowned Mystery, defined Canadian art. Yet, inequalities persisted. The Komagata Maru incident of 1914, denying 376 South Asians entry in Vancouver, exemplified racism. Chinese exclusion tightened in 1923. Indigenous policies worsened. Amendments to the Indian Act compelled school attendance, expanding residential horrors where 3,200 children died by era's end. The Wall Street crash of October 1929 plunged Canada into the Great Depression, amplifying global woes with drought and deflation. Wheat prices plummeted from 1.60 to 30 cents per bushel, birthing prairie dust bowls where grasshoppers devoured crops and black blizzards buried farms. Unemployment hit 27%, with 1.5 million on relief. Tent cities like Vancouver's jungle, breadlines in Toronto. Mackenzie King's Liberals, complacent with not a 5-cent piece for Tory provinces, fell in 1930 to R.B. Bennett's Conservatives, who promised to blast into markets. Bennett's New Deal Light, unemployment insurance pilots, CBC creation in 1936, faltered amid austerity. The On to Ottawa trek of 1935 saw 1,000 relief camp workers ride boxcars protesting 20-cent daily wages. Halted in Regina, riots ensued with 1 death. Radicalism surged. The CCF formed in 1932 under J.S. Woodsworth, advocating socialism, while Quebec's Maurice Duplessis founded Union Nationale, blending nationalism with conservatism. Bennett's radio addresses decrying economic anarchy couldn't stem evictions and Hoovervilles. Social programs emerged. Saskatchewan's Tommy Douglas pioneered Medicare precursors, while the Rowell-Sirois Commission, 1937, recommended federal transfers to equalize provinces. Immigration halted, deporting 28,000. Jewish refugees like the MS St. Louis were turned away in 1939, a shameful "none is too many" policy. As the decade closed, war clouds gathered anew. Hitler's aggressions, Anschluss Munich, prompted King's appeasement visit in 1937, but by 1939 Canada prepared. The British Commonwealth Air Training Plan geared up, as the nation, scarred by depression, braced for another global inferno. This era's tapestry weaves glory with grief. Vimy crest symbolizing unity, the 20s fizz-masking fractures, the 30s dust-teaching resilience. From trench warfare to tariff walls, Canada emerged hardened, its autonomy sharpened, social conscience awakened, a dominion no longer peripheral but pivotal on the world stage, ready to confront the storms ahead. As the 1930s drew to a close amid the dust and despair of the Great Depression, Europe once again teetered on the brink of catastrophe, its fragile peace shattered by the aggressive expansions of Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. For Canada, the outbreak of the Second World War on September 1, 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland, marked a reluctant but resolute return to global conflict, this time with greater autonomy and industrial might. Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King, the wily Liberal leader who had navigated the Depression's storms, delayed declaration for a week after Britain's, symbolizing Canada's independent voice in the Commonwealth. Yet commitment was total. Over 1 million Canadians would serve, transforming the nation into an arsenal of democracy, a beacon of multiculturalism, and a middle power on the world stage. The war's end in 1945 ushered in an era of unprecedented prosperity, the baby boom, suburban sprawl, and welfare state expansions, while Quebec's quiet revolution reshaped cultural landscapes and Indigenous voices began challenging systemic erasure. This period was a whirlwind of sacrifice and renewal, where Canada shed its colonial vestiges, embraced internationalism, and confronted internal reckonings, forging a modern identity amid the atomic age's uncertainties. Let us traverse these transformative years, from the beaches of Normandy to the streets of Expo 67, witnessing a dominion evolve into a confident nation, its story etched in valor, innovation, and the quest for equity. Canada's war effort began modestly but scaled dramatically. King's initial pledge of limited involvement, no conscription, voluntary aid, evolved under pressure as the Blitz ravaged Britain and U-boats prowled Atlantic convoys. The British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, BCATP, launched in 1939, trained 131,000 Allied airmen across Canadian skies, from Manitoba prairies to Ontario bases, earning praise as the aerodrome of democracy. Convoys from Halifax shepherded supplies across the treacherous North Atlantic, with corvettes like HMCS Sackville battling wolf packs in the Battle of the Atlantic, sinking 33 U-boats at the cost of 24 merchant ships monthly at peak. Industrial mobilization was staggering. C.D. Howe's Ministry of Munitions and Supply orchestrated a wartime economy, producing 800,000 trucks, 16,000 aircraft, and billions in munitions. Women flooded factories, Rosie the Riveters assembling, Bren guns in Toronto's Inglis plant, or welding in Vancouver shipyards, swelling the workforce to 375,000, though post-war they faced demotions. Rationing tightened belts, coupons for butter, gasoline, and meat fostered victory gardens and scrap drives. Overseas, Canadian forces shone in pivotal theatres. The 1940 Dunkirk evacuation saw troops cover retreats, but disaster struck at Hong Kong in December 1941, where 1,975 soldiers surrendered to Japanese invaders, enduring brutal POW camps like Omin, with 267 dying in captivity. The Dieppe raid of August 1942, a rehearsal for D-Day, proved costly. 3,367 casualties among 5,000 raiders, tanks bogged on pebble beaches under withering fire, yielding lessons in amphibious warfare. Normandy's Juno Beach on June 6, 1944, etched Canadian heroism. The 3rd Division stormed ashore amid Omaha's chaos, advancing farthest inland by day's end, liberating Caen after fierce house-to-house battles. The Scheldt Estuary Campaign in fall 1944 cleared Antwerp's approaches through flooded polders at 6,367 casualties, enabling Allied supply lines. In Italy, the 1st Division breached the Hitler Line at Monte Cassino, their Ortona Little Stalingrad, a grim urban melee. The Netherlands' liberation in 1945, amid starving civilians during the Hunger Winter, forged enduring bonds, Dutch tulips annually gracing Ottawa in gratitude. Conscription resurfaced toxically. By 1942, King's plebiscite released English Canada from no conscription promises, but Quebec voted 72% against, reviving rifts. Riots in Montreal and the 1944 zombie mutiny, derogatory for home defense draftees, highlighted divisions, though only 13,000 NRMA men deployed overseas late in the war. Home front paranoia led to injustices. Japanese Canadians, 22,000 strong on the west coast, faced internment after Pearl Harbor, properties confiscated, families relocated to camps like Tashme or lemon farms in the interior, a redress not coming until 1988. Italian and German Canadians endured registrations, some interned. Indigenous participation was profound. 4,000 enlisted, including Tommy Prince, a Ojibwe sniper with the Devil's Brigade, earning 11 medals for daring raids. Yet returning veterans lost status rights, fueling activism. Victory in Europe on May 8, 1945, sparked jubilant riots in Halifax, while Japan's surrender on August 15th ended the nightmare. Canada's toll, 45,000 dead, 55,000 wounded, but its role elevated status, separate signatures at surrenders, founding UN membership. Post-war, prosperity exploded. The baby boom swelled populations by 50% to 18 million by 1961, fueled by GI Bill-like veterans' benefits, low-interest loans birthing suburbs like Toronto's Don Mills. Immigration diversified, 1.5 million arrivals, including Dutch farmers, Italian builders, and Hungarian refugees post-1956 uprising. The Trans-Canada Highway, begun in 1950, snaked 7,821 kilometers by 1962, symbolizing connectivity. Welfare state foundations solidified. Family allowances in 1944, baby bonuses, aided child rearing, while unemployment insurance expanded. Louis Saint Laurent, succeeding King in 1948, oversaw Newfoundland's 1949 Confederation, completing the map under Joey Smallwood's advocacy. The Korean War, 1950-1953, committed 27,000 troops, 516 dying in battles like Kapyong, affirming NATO commitments joined in 1949. Economic booms centered on resources. Alberta's 1947 Leduc oil strike birthed petro-wealth, while Quebec's hydro dams powered industries. Television arrived. CBC's 1952 launch, broadcasting Hockey Night in Canada, uniting Saturday nights. Culture flourished. Glenn Gould's 1955 Goldberg Variations, Leonard Cohen's poetic debuts, though American influences via Route 66 diners raised identity concerns. Quebec's quiet revolution ignited in 1960 under Liberal Jean Lesage, toppling Duplessis's conservative Union Nationale. Maîtres chez nous, masters in our own house, drove nationalizations. Hydro-Quebec in 1962, consolidating power utilities, education secularized from church control, birthing CEGEPs. Figures like René Lévesque championed reforms, but separatism simmered, with the Front de Libération du Québec, FLQ, emerging. Civil rights advanced unevenly. The 1947 Chinese Immigration Act repeal ended exclusion, while Indigenous enfranchisement in 1960 granted federal votes without status loss, though residential schools persisted until 1996. Women's advances, equal pay pushes, the 1960 Bill of Rights laying human rights groundwork. Internationalism defined the era. Lester Pearson's diplomacy resolved the 1956 Suez Crisis, earning the 1957 Nobel Peace Prize, and inventing UN peacekeeping, first deployed in Egypt. As Prime Minister from 1963, Pearson introduced the maple leaf flag in 1965, severing Union Jack ties amid debates, and universal health care via the 1966 Medical Care Act, with Saskatchewan's Tommy Douglas pioneering provincially. Expo 67 in Montreal, celebrating Confederation centennial, showcased futurism, Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome, Habitat 67's modular housing, drawing 50 million visitors. Yet undercurrents stirred. Charles de Gaulle's Vive le Québec libre cry from the balcony ignited sovereignty debates. Social shifts accelerated. The pill revolutionized family planning, youth counterculture bloomed with Toronto's Yorkville hippies, and environmentalism dawned post Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. As this chapter fades, the war and its aftermath reveal Canada's metamorphosis, from wartime forge to peacetime powerhouse, its unity tested by Quebec's awakening and global roles. From Dieppe sands to Expo's pavilions, these years built a compassionate, innovative nation, yet one grappling with inequalities and identities, poised for the turbulent transformations ahead. As the confetti settled from Expo 67 and the centennial celebrations faded, Canada entered a dynamic era under the charismatic leadership of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, whose just society vision would redefine the nation's social fabric, constitutional framework, and global stance. Elected in 1968 amid Trudeau-mania, a frenzy of youth rallies and media adoration, the Quebec-born Liberal Prime Minister, an intellectual with a flair for judo and rose lapel symbolism, steered Canada through turbulent waters of separatism, economic shifts, and cultural pluralism. This period, spanning from the late 1960s to the millennium's dawn, was marked by the Official Languages Act's bilingual push, the October Crisis's martial shadow, and the patriation of the Constitution amid provincial wrangles. Indigenous land claims gained momentum, women shattered glass ceilings, and immigrants from Asia and the Caribbean enriched the mosaic, as declared in the 1971 multiculturalism policy. Yet challenges abounded, oil shocks rattling economies, free trade debates polarizing regions, and Quebec's sovereignty referendums testing Federation's bonds. It was a time when Canada asserted its identity as a peaceful, progressive middle power, hosting Olympics and summits while grappling with recessions and reconciliations. Let us delve into this chapter of reinvention, where flower power met federal power, and the maple leaf flag waved over a nation embracing diversity amid the push-pull of unity and autonomy. Trudeau's ascent followed Lester Pearson's retirement, his 1968 victory over Robert Stanfield's Conservatives, capitalizing on youth appeal and promises of participatory democracy. The Official Languages Act of 1969 mandated bilingual federal services, elevating French nationally, but sparking Western backlash against forced bilingualism. Quebec's linguistic tensions simmered. The Parti Québécois, PQ, founded by René Lévesque in 1968, championed sovereignty association, blending independence with economic ties to Canada. The October Crisis of 1970 thrust Canada into international headlines. The Front de Libération du Québec, FLQ, a radical separatist cell, kidnapped British diplomat James Cross and Quebec Labour Minister Pierre Laporte, demanding prisoner releases and manifesto broadcasts. Trudeau invoked the War Measures Act, suspending civil liberties, deploying troops to Montreal, arresting 497 without charge in pre-dawn raids. Laporte's murder in a Montreal duplex horrified the nation, but Cross's release after 59 days quelled the immediate threat. Trudeau's steely "just watch me" retort to reporters defended the crackdown, though critics decried overreach, with 87% public approval masking long-term Quebec alienation. Economically, the 1970s stagflation, high inflation, unemployment buffeted Canada. The 1973 OPEC oil embargo quadrupled prices, benefiting Alberta's tar sands, but crippling manufacturing in Ontario and Quebec. Trudeau's National Energy Program, NEP, in 1980 aimed to Canadianize oil, imposing export taxes and Petro-Canada expansions, but Western premiers like Alberta's Peter Lougheed railed against Ottawa's raid, fueling alienation slogans like "Let the Eastern bastards freeze in the dark." Inflation peaked at 12.5% in 1981, prompting wage and price controls under the Anti-Inflation Board. Indigenous activism surged. The 1969 White Paper, proposed by Indian Affairs Minister Jean Chrétien, sought to abolish the Indian Act and treaties for assimilation, denounced as cultural genocide by leaders like Harold Cardinal, whose Citizens Plus countered with rights recognition. The 1973 Calder case, where Nisga'a claimed Aboriginal title, prompted comprehensive claims negotiations. The James Bay Agreement of 1975 with Quebec Cree and Inuit traded hydro development for $225 million, and land rights, a model for Northern Accords. Women's rights advanced profoundly. The Royal Commission on the Status of Women, reporting in 1970, spurred reforms. Equal pay provisions in the 1977 Human Rights Act, maternity leave extensions, and abortion decriminalization via the 1969 Criminal Code amendments, though Dr. Henry Morgan Taylor's clinics faced raids until the 1988 Supreme Court struck down restrictions in R.V. Morgan Taylor, citing charter violations. Multiculturalism became policy cornerstone. Trudeau's 1971 declaration in Parliament affirmed no official culture, supporting ethnic groups with funding for festivals and heritage languages, reflected in the 1988 Multiculturalism Act. Immigration shifted post-1967 point system from European dominance to Asian and Caribbean influxes, with Vietnamese boat people, 78,000, resettled by 1980, exemplifying humanitarianism. Quebec's 1976 election elevated the PQ, with Lévesque's Bill 101 mandating French in education and business, anglicizing stop to arrête signs and prompting Anglo-exodus. The 1980 referendum on sovereignty association failed 60-40%, Trudeau promising renewal but delivering patriation without Quebec's consent. The Constitution Act of 1982, signed by Queen Elizabeth II on Ottawa's Parliament Hill amid April rain, patriated the British North America Act with an amending formula and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, guaranteeing freedoms, equality, and minority language education. Quebec's veto absence led to Lévesque's Beau Risqué boycott, while the Kitchen Accord, nighttime negotiations excluding Quebec, cemented the deal. The Charter revolutionized jurisprudence, striking down laws on hate speech, same-sex rights, and assisted dying in later decades. Trudeau's foreign policy emphasized peacekeeping and anti-apartheid, withdrawing from Vietnam monitoring but contributing to Cyprus and Sinai missions. The 1976 Montreal Olympics, marred by $1.5 billion debts and African boycotts, showcased athletic prowess, with Nadia Comaneci's perfect tens, but highlighted fiscal woes. Brian Mulroney's Progressive Conservatives swept in 1984, ending 2 decades of Liberal rule with 201 seats. The bilingual New Brunswicker, with a baritone charm honed in labor law, pursued free trade and reconciliation. The 1987 Meech Lake Accord aimed to woo Quebec with distinct society status, decentralized powers and Senate reforms, but died in 1990 when Manitoba's Elijah Harper, a Cree MLA, blocked ratification over Indigenous exclusions, and Newfoundland's Clyde Wells withdrew support. The Charlottetown Accord of 1992, broader with Indigenous self-government and elected Senate, failed in a national referendum, 54.3% no, amid Western reform demands and Quebec's ambivalence. These collapses birthed the Bloc Québécois federally under Lucien Bouchard and the Reform Party under Preston Manning, fragmenting politics. Economically, Mulroney's Canada-US Free Trade Agreement (FTA) of 1988 expanded to NAFTA in 1994 with Mexico, liberalized markets but deindustrialized sectors, with auto pacts cushioning Ontario. The Goods and Services Tax (GST) in 1991 at 7% replaced hidden manufacturers' sales tax but tanked popularity. Recession hit hard in 1990-1992, unemployment at 11.3%, but recovery followed with balanced budgets under Finance Minister Paul Martin. OK crisis of 1990 spotlighted land disputes. Mohawk warriors barricaded roads near Montreal against golf course expansion on ancestral burial grounds, a 78-day standoff with army tanks and a soldier's death, ending in negotiated withdrawal but inspiring nationwide solidarity camps. Jean Chrétien's Liberals returned in 1993, slashing deficits via program reviews, cutting transfers, privatizing CN Rail, achieving surpluses by 1997. The 1995 Quebec referendum, with Jacques Parizeau's PQ pushing sovereignty, narrowly failed 50.6-49.4%, with money and ethnic votes gaffes exposing divisions. Clarity Act of 2000 mandated clear questions for future votes. Social milestones abounded. The 1985 Indian Act Amendment restored status to women marrying non-Indigenous, while the 1996 Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples recommended self-governance. Same-sex benefits extended federally in 1999, prelude to 2005 marriage equality. Environmentalism grew. The 1987 Montreal Protocol phased out ozone depleters, while Clayoquot Sound protests in 1993 halted old-growth logging. Cultural icons emerged: Celine Dion's global stardom, Cirque du Soleil's acrobatic wonders, and hockey's Gretzky trade in 1988, symbolizing commercialization. The 1988 Calgary Winter Olympics, with Eddie the Eagle's whimsy and Battle of the Bryans, boosted national pride. As the millennium approached, Y2K fears fizzled, but tech booms like Nortel's fiber optics soared, then crashed. Canada's UN peacekeeping peaked in the 1990s, with Somalia scandals tainting reputations, but Rwanda heroics by Romeo Dallaire highlighting genocide failures. This era's close portrays a Canada matured, Trudeau's charisma yielding to Mulroney's deals, and Chrétien's pragmatism, multiculturalism thriving amid constitutional heartaches. From Oka barricades to NAFTA signings, these decades wove diversity into strength, economic resilience from turmoil, setting the stage for 21st century challenges in a globalized world. As the new millennium dawned, Canada stood at the threshold of a digital age, its vast landscapes now interconnected by fiber optics and satellites, its people navigating the promises of globalization amid the perils of terrorism, climate change, and economic volatility. The nation, once defined by fur trades and frontier expansions, had matured into a G7 powerhouse, a multicultural haven championing human rights, environmental stewardship, and quiet diplomacy. Yet, the 21st century brought seismic shifts. The trauma of 9/11 drawing Canada into prolonged conflicts, financial meltdowns testing resilience, and a pandemic reshaping daily life. Under leaders like Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, Stephen Harper, and Justin Trudeau, Canada grappled with Indigenous reconciliation, Quebec sovereignty echoes, and the rise of populism. From the oil sands boom to the wildfires' rage, this era has been one of adaptation and aspiration, where diversity became strength, innovation drove growth, and global crises forged national solidarity. As we traverse these recent decades up to 2025, witness a Canada confronting its complexities with trademark pragmatism, emerging as a beacon of progressive values in an uncertain world. The early 2000s under Liberal Prime Minister Jean Chrétien were marked by fiscal prudence and international engagement. Having inherited balanced budgets from the 1990s austerity, Chrétien's government posted surpluses, paying down debt while investing in healthcare via the 2000 Romano Commission, which recommended bolstering public funding. Socially, the 2000 Clarity Act set stringent rules for secession referendums, a response to Quebec's near miss in 1995. But global events intruded. The September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the US prompted heightened border security and Canada's invocation of NATO's Article 5, leading to deployment in Afghanistan by October 2001. Over 40,000 troops rotated through Kandahar, with 158 fatalities by mission's end in 2014, a commitment that boosted military spending but sparked debates over Canada's peacekeeping legacy versus combat roles. Chrétien's refusal to join the 2003 Iraq War, citing lack of UN sanction, preserved Canada's multilateralist image, though it strained US relations. Domestically, the 2003 SARS outbreak in Toronto, killing 44 and quarantining thousands, exposed health vulnerabilities, prompting pandemic preparedness reforms. Chrétien retired in 2003, succeeded by Paul Martin, whose brief tenure focused on Indigenous issues via the 2005 Kelowna Accord, promising $5 billion for education and housing, though it lapsed unpursued. The 2006 election ushered in Conservative Stephen Harper, a Calgary economist advocating smaller government and Western interests. His minority governments navigated the 2008 global financial crisis, injecting $40 billion in stimuli, bank bailouts, infrastructure like Vancouver's Canada Line, averting deep recession, though unemployment hit 8.7%. Harper's majority in 2011 enabled bolder moves, withdrawing from the Kyoto Protocol in 2011, citing economic burdens, and promoting Alberta's oil sands via Keystone XL pipeline advocacy, clashing with environmentalists. Socially, the 2008 Apology for Residential Schools and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, launched that year, acknowledged genocidal policies, with 94 calls to action guiding reconciliation, including the 2015 final report. Culturally, the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics showcased Indigenous art and athletic triumphs, Canada's record 14 golds, including Sidney Crosby's overtime goal, boosting national pride amid $6 billion costs. Harper's era saw cannabis decriminalization debates, but progress stalled. Instead, mandatory minimum sentences toughened criminal justice. Foreign policy tilted conservative, staunch Israel support, Arctic sovereignty assertions via 2007 military bases, and free trade pacts like the 2014 EU deal. Harper's 2015 defeat to Justin Trudeau, son of Pierre embodying youthful charisma, marked a liberal resurgence. Trudeau's sunny ways promised gender parity in cabinet because it's 2015, climate action and reconciliation. The 2015 Paris Agreement commitment set emission targets, though pipelines like Trans Mountain, approved in 2016, drew protests from Indigenous and environmental groups. The 2018 cannabis legalization via the Cannabis Act created a regulated market, generating billions in revenue while addressing black market harms. The inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, concluding in 2019 with genocide findings, amplified calls for justice, leading to a 2021 National Action Plan. Economically, the 2018 USMCA renegotiated NAFTA amid Trump tariffs, safeguarding trade. But scandals plagued the 2019 SNC-Lavalin affair, where Trudeau pressured Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould, eroded trust, though Liberals retained power in minorities. The 2020s dawned catastrophically with COVID-19, first case January 2020, exploding into lockdowns, CERB benefits aiding 9 million, and vaccine rollouts by late 2020. Over 53,000 deaths by 2023 tested federal-provincial relations, with Trudeau's Emergencies Act invocation in 2022 quelling the Freedom Convoy protests, truckers blockading Ottawa against mandates, disrupting borders and economy. Wet'suwet'en pipeline protests in 2020 highlighted land rights, blocking rails nationwide. Global solidarity shone. Post-2022, Russian invasion of Ukraine, Canada provided $4 billion in aid, Leopard tanks and trained pilots, accepting over 200,000 refugees. Queen Elizabeth II's 2022 death ended a 70-year reign. King Charles III's accession included Indigenous consultations on monarchy's future. Pope Francis's 2022 apology for Catholic residential school rolls amid discoveries of unmarked graves at Kamloops 2021 intensified healing efforts. Climate crises escalated. 2023 wildfires burned 18 million hectares, evacuating 200,000, blanketing cities in smoke, worst on record, linked to warming. 2024 saw continued fires, with Quebec and Alberta hardest hit. Politically, Trudeau's third term faced inflation post-pandemic, housing crises, and conservative surges under Pierre Poilievre. The 2024 India diplomatic row over Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar's killing strained ties with mutual expulsions. Entering 2025, US President Trump's February reimposition of 25% tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos sparked a trade war, retaliatory duties on US goods, and economic uncertainty amid supply chain disruptions. British Columbia's political drama saw MLA Dallas Brody's expulsion from Conservatives over ethics probes. Culturally, Toronto's 2025 International Film Festival highlighted Indigenous filmmakers, while anniversaries like the 100th of the United Church underscored unity quests. Socially, gender equality advanced with 2023 pay transparency laws, and environmental pacts like the 2022 Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework committed to protecting 30% of lands. Yet, challenges persist. Housing affordability crises displacing youth, opioid epidemics claiming 7,000 lives annually, and Indigenous water advisories lingering despite pledges. As we reflect on this contemporary saga, modern Canada embodies resilience forged in diversity, from Afghan mission scars to pandemic pivots, from reconciliation strides to climate battles. Triumphs like marriage equality and cannabis reform coexist with trials like trade wars and wildfires, reminding us that this northern giant, home to 40 million dreamers, continues evolving, not as a finished masterpiece, but as a living canvas of hope, humility, and unyielding progress in a fractured world. In tracing Canada's epic from ancient Ice Age migrations to the digital frontiers of 2025, we uncover a narrative of endurance, convergence, and transformation. The Indigenous Foundations, Section 1, laid a rich tapestry of nations thriving in harmony with the land, from Haida totems to Iroquois confederacies, until European explorations, Section 2, initiated contacts blending wonder with woe, Cabot's fisheries, Champlain's alliances, and fur trade webs reshaping economies. New France flourished, Section 3, as a seigneurial society of habitants and voyageurs, its Catholic zeal and Indigenous pacts clashing with British ambitions culminating in the 7 Years' War conquest, Section 4. On the Plains of Abraham birthing British North America amid Pontiac's rebellion and loyalist influxes. The American Revolution and War of 1812, Section 5, tested loyalties, forging borders through Brock's heroism and Tecumseh's stand, while rebellions in 1837 spurred responsible government, Section 6, under Durham's reforms and Baldwin LaFontaine's alliances. Confederation in 1867, Section 7, united provinces via Macdonald's vision, expanding westward amid Riel's resistances and the CPR's completion, linking coasts in iron. The Laurier boom, Section 8, swelled prairies with immigrants, legalizing diverse unions, though Boer War divisions hinted at autonomy. World War I's Vimy triumph and the Depression's despair, Section 9, molded welfare foundations, with King's diplomacy navigating interwar isolation. World War II's Juno Beach valor and post-war boom, Section 10, birthed suburbs, Medicare, and Pearson's peacekeeping Nobel, while Quebec's Quiet Revolution secularized society. Trudeau's Charter and multiculturalism, Section 11, patriated the Constitution, weathered October crisis and referendums, and embraced NAFTA amid OK standoffs. Today, Section 12, Canada confronts wildfires, pandemics, and trade wars, yet champions reconciliation, cannabis reform, and Ukraine aid, a mosaic resilient against division. This saga isn't mere chronology, it's the pulse of peoples turning adversity into advancement, from Beringia crossings to Arctic assertions. Canada's strength lies in its duality, French-English, Indigenous settler, Old-New, fostering innovation, compassion, and quiet power. As global tempests rage, this northern sentinel stands as a model of inclusive prosperity, its history a compass for futures where unity triumphs over fracture, and every voice echoes in the vast, enduring chorus of nationhood.